In this video, I'm going to show you how to slice the sprite for the Hangman assignment. As you can see, I already have a 2D Unity project opened up. In it, I have uploaded the Hangman sprite. I only have one scene and I don't have any scripts created just yet. So the first step is going to be for us to slice the sprite in order to be able to use the individual images. As you can see, right now I have an asset that has a sprite sheet with basically 3 columns and 4 rows. So if I select the asset in the project view, I can see it's already downloaded or uploaded as a Sprite 2D UI texture type. The Sprite mode is selected to be single, and that's how it's considering the image as an individual image. I can use the drop-down menu here and change this to multiple. I can apply this change by clicking on the Apply button. And then I can open up the Sprite editor to take a look at the sprite sheet. Because I don't have any transparency in the image, the automatic method might be difficult to use. However, using the grid by cell count will work. So by cell size would work if we knew the individual size of the images, which we could do with a little bit of math. But here I'm going to use by cell count. Basically, it's letting me know how many columns and or it's asking for how many columns and how many rows I have. So here I have 3 columns and 4 rows. I could manipulate a little bit the offset and the padding as needed. But for this one, I'm just going to keep it simple. And then I can keep the pivot to the center. Then I can click on the slice button, and then as you can see, I have individual images there selected. I'm going to consider that this is good enough. You could adjust some of the edges if needed. I'm going to click on the Apply button and close the Sprite editor. And now if I look at the image in the Assets folder, I can notice that my sprite sheet has been subdivided into sub-images, which is great. The next step is going to be changing the image in the code. So this is relatively simple. Right now I'm going to add an image. I'm going to probably anchor it. Let's imagine I'm going to anchor it to the middle right of the screen. So I'll rename it first. Hangman image. And then I'm going to anchor it by pressing Shift and Alt, changing at the same time the pivot and the position so that it's in the middle right corner of the screen. I can give a little bit of a margin to the right so that there's a little bit of space between the edge of the screen and the image. And then I could decide for the first image to provide one of them to make sure that it actually matches my screen. If I use a set native size, it will kind of adjust the size of the image with the size of the resource. It seems a little bit on the small side. One way I can change that is by selecting the sprite sheet. And as you know here, or as you notice maybe, here the pixels per unit is showing the number of pixels that will be represented in 1 unit of the screen. So if I make that number smaller, then a smaller portion of the image will represent a unit in the screen. And if I make it bigger, then a bigger amount of the image will be displayed in 1 unit of the screen. So I'm going to choose a smaller number to make my image look bigger. Maybe I'll try 60, and then I'm going to use Apply. After that, I can go back to my image and use the set native size, and you can see my sprite looks a little bit bigger, which is better. Well, it seems better here for me. So the next thing I'm going to do now is add an empty game object that's going to manage the change of the sprites here for this particular image. And for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to use the click of the mouse. Obviously, in the Hangman assignment, you're going to need to find a different method there. as you will need to change the sprite as the user guesses incorrectly a letter. So here I'm going to create an empty game object. I'm going to call it Hangman Manager. And then I'm going to create a C# script that I'm going to call as well Hangman Manager. And I'm going to assign it right away to the game object. This way I know it's already in my scene. Let's open up the script now. So in order to be able to display an image, I'm going to need the images to display. It would be ideal to add them in an array. So I'm going to make this public so I can initialize it in the inspector. It's going to be sprites. So it's going to be an array of sprites, and I'm going to call it maybe Hangman Images. Next, I'm also going to need to have the UI element, the image UI. So because I'm dealing with UI objects, I need to make sure I import unityengine.ui. And in that case, I can declare a variable that will be public of the image type, and I can call it Hangman Image, for example. And then the last item that I need to initialize, which could be a private variable, is going to be an index for tracking which image is currently displayed. And I can call it current image index, and that will work. So now I need to initialize these variables. The two public ones will be initialized in the inspector momentarily. Here I'm going to set this index to 0. Next, I'm going to update the image. So I'm going to use Hangman Image.Sprite, and then I can assign to it the first element of the Hangman Images folder. Since I'm displaying this current image, I need to update the index and increment that by 1. So let's initialize the other two here, the other two variables, by saving the script and going back to Unity. It'll take a moment to synchronize. Now if I select the Hangman Manager, it's expecting the sprites in this array. And then the image, that's pretty easy. I'm going to do this. To facilitate the selection of the sprites, I'm going to lock the Hangman Manager in the inspector. And then I'm going to go into my assets. I'm going to select the first sprite from the sprite sheet and then press Shift and select the last one. And then I'm going to select one of them and drag them on the word Hangman Images. And as I do this, it automatically fills out all of the element, providing me 12 images. So that's great, but if I press play, it's going to implement the first image, which was already in place, so I don't see a very big difference. The next step is going to be to update the image, and this is done relatively quickly. I'm going to reopen my game manager, my Hangman Manager. So in the update, I'm going to check for the click of the mouse, and I'm going to look for the left click. So if that were the case, then I'm just going to move on to the next image. I want to make sure that my index is less than the length of my array. So I'm going to check that first. And if that's the case, that means I can display the next one. So I can just pick up the code that I had here and display it over here. Instead of using 0, I would have to use the current image index and then increment it. And we're going to consider the case where we've run out of images. In that case, we'll just put a debug statement. Of course, in your code, that would be managed by the loss for the player. So once I have this simple code set up here, and again, I'm just using the click of the mouse to kind of move the images forward. You would have to wait for the user to enter an incorrect letter for this to happen in your assignment. if I were to press play, and if I did not make any mistake, anytime I click in the scene, I update the image to the next step. Well, you can see they're slightly off-centered for some of them, and then as soon as I run out of images, I get this error there, but that's just a message that I printed. So that kind of shows you a little bit on how to slice the images and how to change them with your code. Some of the settings, of course, would be different in your assignment, but you have the basics on how to do that. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.